everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Thanksgiving Dinner with the University of Maine Food Team webinar. I'm Lisa Fishman, Nutrition and Food Safety Professional in Aroostook County. Thank you for joining us today. After the success of our food preservation webinar series earlier this year, we decided to continue the fun with more cooking and nutrition webinars. These webinars will deliver current research-based recommendations for healthy cooking using some great produce from Maine farmers, tips for shopping local, and food projects that will keep you busy and engaged this whole winter. We will be today joined by my food team colleagues, Kathy Savoy, Kate McCarty, Vinya Lindley, and Rob Dumas. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, and nutrition. Finally, we want to let you know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activities. Today, we will focus on cooking Thanksgiving dinner using local ingredients, and we'll have tips for shopping at the farmer's market, great ideas for using local foods in your traditional recipes, and demonstrate our favorite holiday recipes that we hope will inspire you for your holiday feast. A little bit of housekeeping first. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. We want to answer your questions though, so please ask them as they come up for you throughout the presentation by using the question and answer feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thanks again for joining us. Now, let's get started. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, number one, and that is COVID-19. And how COVID-19 is changing the way we celebrate this year. Many of us will be foregoing traditional holiday plans with friends and family, and will be feeling pretty sad about that. So this year, we'll be sure to take extra time to reflect on those things in our lives that we are truly thankful for. And one of those things, certainly, is the good food that we're going to enjoy, and the farmers and the producers of local foods that bring those foods to us, from farmers to butchers to bakers and cheesemakers. And I need to advance my slide because my mouse died, unfortunately. There. Today, we're going to share our favorite holiday recipes and recommend ways that you can incorporate local foods in an affordable way into your holiday meal. And we'll have the best practices for food safety that we'll share with you so that you can enjoy your meal and not only have a delicious feast, but reduce your risk for foodborne illness as well. First up on our trip around the Thanksgiving table is winter squash, which Kathy is going to tell you all about.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the demonstration kitchen here at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, Cumberland County office. My name is Kathy Savoy, and yes, indeed, I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite side dishes at the Thanksgiving table, which is winter squash. So as you all know, winter squash comes in a wide variety, and they are not only different in terms of variety, but as far as flavor, sizes, types, you name it. I've got, and I'd like to spotlight a few of the squash varieties that are widely available here in Maine to show you. And let's start off by looking at this one, which is our And I'm going to hold it close to the camera. We're going to see that this is one of our buttercup varieties. I like this because it tends to be a little waxy. It's great eating. You can stuff it. You can cook it in a number of different ways. Another green variety that we have, and you can see this lovely medley of squash varieties that we have here, is an acorn squash. This is a small enough squash to be able to cut up and stuff, which is actually what we're going to be doing in today's recipe in the kitchen. And then as we move along, you can see there are a number of other types of squash, and I have both a blue and a red Kabucha Squash variety. These tend to be on the wetter side, so they are great used as mashed squash. So again, you can get them in both the blue or the red or orange variety. And if you're a gardener, you know that those are quite plentiful as plants as well. And over here we have a butternut variety, which is a very, very popular one. And then also a spaghetti squash over here, which is a really different type of squash in that when you cook it and then it breaks up into lots of strands like spaghetti would. So you can use it in place of spaghetti. So it's a great substitute in terms of that. The other item that I have here is a pie pumpkin. So this is a great product to use if you're looking to get that nice creamy consistency that you want for a pumpkin pie. So this truly is classified as a pie pumpkin. It is not your jack-o'-lantern variety pumpkin, because those are really designed to be good for carving, and they really have long strands in them, and they are not designed to be a good eating variety. So if you're looking for a pumpkin to eat, make sure you're looking for a pie pumpkin variety. So what all of these things have in common is that they do require cooking prior to eating, and you can cook them in a number of different ways. You can roast them, you can mash them, you can use your microwave to steam them. You could use their pureed parts in soups, and you can also use them in baked goods. So quick breads, pies, all sorts of things. One of the common complaints for folks is that these squash varieties tend to be a little hard to cut into. And one of the resources that we're going to share with you today is a great video that comes from our colleagues at the University of Iowa that demonstrates how to use the microwave to be able to quickly and easily open up a squash. And basically you just pierce the squash and then put it, after it's been washed, you pierce it and then put it in the microwave on just the normal power cycle for up to 6 minutes. And that's very much dependent on the size of your squash. And then it's really cooked and it's much softer and much easier to be able to cut open and get into. So another great thing about all these winter squash varieties is that if you're familiar with winter squash, you know that they have a bright, beautiful orange flesh. And wherever we see orange flesh in our food world, we can know that that is telling us that it's high in vitamin A. So our whole squash world is high in vitamin A. Like the other members of the fruit and vegetable family, it is also high in potassium. So you're bound to get lots of good nutrients by enjoying winter squash as a side dish at your Thanksgiving table. So I'm going to take a minute and move all these great squash out of my way. And we're then going to get into today's recipe that I'm going to share, which is a stuffed squash recipe. So oftentimes I have found that I have people visiting for the holidays that may or may not want to enjoy that roasted turkey and are looking for a vegetarian alternative. So today's recipe is incorporating a lovely stuffing into some pre-cooked squash varieties. And so I have Acorn Squash here on the outside, and then I have a lovely Delicata, which is one of my personal favorites. It's got a really nice nutty flavor to it. So these have been pre-cooked. I actually just steamed them in the microwave using the technique I described earlier. You could roast them in your oven if you wanted to. Either way, you want to get them to a soft place so they're easy to be able to eat, because the next step includes creating a stuffing that will go into your prepared squash. So if you have visited our webinars in the past, you may recognize this item. It is a black barley that has been cooked ahead of time. And so this will be the base of my stuffing. If you wanted to use another type of grain, you certainly could. Quinoa is a favorite in this recipe as well, and would certainly be something that those who were looking to avoid gluten would enjoy having as part of this dish as well. So I've got my prepared black barley, which just took a quick 20 minutes to cook. So it was 1 cup of barley to 2 cups of water, and I just cooked it on low, and it was ready to go in 20 minutes. And then to add to that, I have prepared some lovely onions and garlic sauteed down in olive oil, salt and pepper, and then I stirred in a kale variety, so and also some fresh sage. So we've got some great flavors that are going to be added to this plain barley, and then we're going to go ahead and stuff the cavities of those squash. I'm also going to say, here is a wonderful opportunity for you to be as creative as you want in the kitchen. So you could use a different type of green, you could use craisins, you could do some nuts or anything in here to really make it based on the flavors that you like. So you can see we've got everything mixed up real well. I do have some toasted pine nuts that I'm going to sprinkle in here as well. And in a perfect world, I think I would have added some craisins to this dish as well, just to give it a little more color. And then all that you do is pack this stuffing into your prepared squash cavities. And so you've got a lovely whole grain, you've got lovely vegetables in here being packed into a real, nutrient rich vegetable. So this is a really nice healthy side dish that's sure to be a crowd pleaser. So everything is already cooked. All that you really need to do with this side dish is get it reheated. So you might want to cover this with, the casserole dish cover, or a piece of tin foil if you needed to. Heat it back up in a 350-degree oven. One of the things that I like to do with this is to finish it off with a lovely cheese on top that gets toasted at the end, and it really helps to hold everything together nicely. So that is my recipe that I wanted to share with all of you. And you can see just how beautiful it is. I also wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the other issues that have to do with working with winter squash in your kitchen. So nobody likes to talk about mold in the kitchen, but the reality is we can sometimes find mold on our winter squash. So can you use it or not? Winter squash falls into the category of a firm vegetable, meaning it doesn't have a high water activity, high water availability. So if you do see a small mold spot on your winter squash, you can cut off that mold spot, and you want to cut off at least 1 inch around that whole mold spot, and then the remaining part of the winter squash is safe to use. So we'll have a resource on that at the end of our webinar. And I also wanted to talk about long-term storage of your winter squash. We've covered this in our previous webinars, and just want to remind you that winter squash is something that you can store at home. Take advantage of the great price that it's being sold for right now, and you can store it in your own home for 1 to 6 months with the following conditions, and that is a relatively dry area. It likes a cool temperature. So to be more specific, that's right around 50 degrees. And again, it can last for 1 to 6 months. So great time to take advantage of those sales that you may be seeing at farmers markets, farm stands, and even some of our large local grocery stores are carrying Maine grown squash. And I've seen the prices as low as 47 cents a pound. So that really makes a dish like this something that's very economical, but is also supporting our local food system. So one more thing to discuss before I pass this off is how to handle leftovers. So with a smaller gathering for Christmas, people may be having more leftovers on hand than normal. So our Thanksgiving leftovers should all be used or frozen within 4 days, with the exception of gravy, which should be used within 2 days. So in the event that you had leftover stuffed squash like this, you could in fact freeze that. Remember to label and date it so you know what it is, and then use that for, a lunch on the go later on in the year. And another thing I wanted to mention is that when you do have mashed pumpkin and you're looking to use it as a substitute for a can of pumpkin or a can of squash, a little piece of trivia is that a 1 can size of pumpkin, and that's a 15-ounce size can of pumpkin, equals 2 cups of pumpkin. So if you have a lot of squash or pumpkin, you can use them interchangeably, left over, and you're going to be substituting it in a baked good or in a pie recipe for a can of pumpkin, you're going to want to freeze it in a 2-cup unit and make sure you label that so that you know that it is the equivalent of 1 can, and you can go ahead and use it simply in that recipe as an equal substitution. So that is the end of my discussion of my side dish that I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to pass it off to Vinya now, up the coast, who's going to talk about Brussels sprouts. Vinya?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Those stuffed squash sound amazing, and like they will be on the table at my house this year for Thanksgiving because we have a lot of squash. So another menu item that is always on my Thanksgiving table are Brussels sprouts. My husband would not approve of Thanksgiving if Brussels sprouts were not on the table. They're our favorite. And so I'm going to be doing a demo today of a really simple sauteed Brussels sprout, super easy. I'm going to go ahead and get those going so that you can see the whole process start to finish. And we'll talk more about them. So I have a very hot saute pan going here. This is an electric skillet. And just gonna go ahead and add a nice generous amount of oil. I have some Brussels sprouts that have been cut in half. And I'm going to go ahead and let those just saute while we talk more about Brussels sprouts. Hopefully they won't be too loud. You can hear them sizzling. You might have noticed that I I'm trying not to. I'm going to go back to the view of those. I'm leaving lots of room in the pan for them. Trying not to crowd them because I really don't want steamed Brussels sprouts. I want them to get a good caramelization on them. So I might end up doing them in more than one batch at a time because they really need to have plenty of room to get a good caramelization on them. So, fun fact about Brussels sprouts, a cup of cooked Brussels sprouts contains more than 100% of the daily needed vitamin C, as well as a whole slew of other vitamins. But aside from the health benefits, they're super delicious. Even my very picky preschooler loves them. They'll get nice and sweet and kind of nutty when they're caramelized. And so when choosing Brussels sprouts, I usually purchase sprouts that have been already removed from the stem, but you can purchase whole stalks at farmers markets and sometimes at specialty food stores. For me, the drawback to buying still on the stem is that they're a little bit harder to store. They're kind of cumbersome and take up a lot of room. And the sprouts along the stalk, the ones at the bottom are a lot larger than the ones on the top, so you don't get a consistent size. I like to purchase Brussels sprouts that are similar size because you'll ensure that they'll cook at a similar rate. You also want to look for nice green, tightly wrapped heads and avoid any that have obvious pest damage or are turning yellow. They'll keep in the crisper for about a week. And a quick search of grocery stores nearby, I found a range of around $3 a pound up to about $6 a pound for organic Brussels sprouts. And a pound of Brussels sprouts will serve about 5 people. So that ends up being really a little bit less than $1 a serving. When you factor in the oil and the garlic that I'm adding to these, it probably is right at the $1 mark per serving. So that I think pretty reasonable. So these are, I'm gonna try to switch back here to show you they are getting some nice color on them. And when I'm happy with the color, it does not take too long, but I'll go ahead and add a little bit of garlic to the pan, and I'll actually cover them and let them steam a little bit. You can see that I'm cooking these in an electric skillet that's turned up to the highest temperature. But these will do just as well on the stovetop in a large skillet or in the oven turned to about 450 degrees. I like cooking Brussels sprouts on the stovetop because real estate in the oven is usually at a premium at Thanksgiving with the turkey and stuffing and pies all needing to be baked in the oven. So I like having something that I can do on the stovetop, or if you have an electric skillet, this is also a perfectly acceptable way to cook them. So they are getting nice and dark here. So I'm gonna go back to the overhead view, and we'll go ahead and add garlic, a little slug more oil. And I'm going to go ahead and cover them up. I want them to steam a little bit so that they get soft enough inside. So those are just about there. And this is usually the last dish that I prepare at Thanksgiving because it really just cooks in about 5 or 10 minutes. and I want to serve them nice and warm directly after cooking. Before I cooked these, I did thoroughly wash and dry them and cut them in half to get a nice surface so that you get that browning. And once the pan was hot, I just added a couple of tablespoons of oil and put the Brussels sprouts, as you saw, into the pan. Try to resist the urge to stir them too frequently so that they get nice browning on them. And when they are at a color that I'm looking for, just threw the garlic in there. And once they're done cooking, I'll often season with some salt and maybe some grated Parmesan cheese. But today, in sort of a nod to the green bean casserole, I'm topping these with a fried onion, which adds a really nice, crunchy, salty contrast to the sweetness of the Brussels sprouts. So I'll go ahead and just show you the finished product. So ta-da, they're looking nice and crunchy and delicious. So I hope that you'll give these a try, and that's about it for me on Brussels sprouts. I will pass it off to Lisa up in Aroostook County to very appropriately tell us more about potatoes.
Well, thank you, Vinya. And those Brussels sprouts look delicious. I'm kind of like feeling hungry right now looking at those. So yes, I'm up in Aroostook County, and potatoes are certainly abundant here in this part of the state. And I gotta say, over the years, potatoes have really grown up. When I was young, I didn't know one potato brand from another. They were just potatoes. But there are over 200 varieties of potatoes, and there are 7 categories of potatoes. So we're going to talk about some of them here. I have here red Norlands, and when you cut open a red Norland, there are beautiful white flesh in there. And the next one I have up here are Katahdins. These are what we would normally call a round boiling potato, but they are a nice sized potato, and they cut open again to a nice white color in here with a potato with brownish tan flesh skin on the outside. We have our russet potatoes, which are known typically as baker potatoes. This particular variety here is the Caribou Russet, coming from the experimental station here in Aroostook, next door to Caribou, Maine. These are usually baked, and they are very, very creamy and delicious when they come out of the oven. We have also the Adirondack Blue. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you've ever flown on JetBlue Airlines, then all of the potato chips that are served on JetBlue at one point came out of Aroostook County, Maine. Farmer and Van Buren would provide all those potato chips for JetBlue Airlines. These are kind of a fun variety. I'll show you at the end of my little talk here what they look like when they're cooked and they're mashed up. Some people think they're really cool to serve, a purple potato, and some people are like, ooh, that's Dr. Seuss material there. So we'll talk about that too. And then the last one we have here is the Yukon Gold, which is a tan colored outside, but the inside is a nice golden color. And when you cook that up, the color is likewise a very beautiful yellow, very pale yellow golden color. Different potatoes definitely have different uses. And when you're making mashed potatoes, which is a part of my Thanksgiving table and always has been, it's often recommended to use a couple of different varieties of potato in your mashed potatoes. Now, for years and years and years, the #1 potato that people would go to for making a mashed potato was your basic round white potato, something like the Katahdin here. Now, again, as I mentioned, I never could taste a lot of subtle differences in potatoes growing up, but it's kind of like apples. You grab an apple and you bite into that, and you can tell the difference between all the various apples that are out there. Believe me, I can tell the difference now between a Green Mountain or a Shepherdie or a Katahdin or a Kennebec, just based on the different attributes of the potato. So there are differences. When you're making a mashed potato, you do want to look for a combination of a nice waxy and a nice starchy potato, about a 50-50 mix. For years, that, as I mentioned, the #1 potato for mashed potatoes was the round white, and that has been replaced by the Yukon Gold. Is now America's #1 choice for a mashed potato on the Thanksgiving table or any table for mashed potatoes. It has a very creamy texture. It has a very mild flavor. All potatoes with a high starchy content are going to absorb butter and milk and water and salt very easily. That starch content will soak those all up. So that makes for a very, very flavorful mashed potato when you have all of those different things that you're adding to them. So we are going to talk about the steps to making a mashed potato. And the first thing you want to do when you buy your potatoes, whether you buy them at the grocery store or a farmer's market or a self-serve farm stand kiosk on the side of the road, no matter where you get them from, you're always going to want to get those home and wash them as soon as you can. There's lots of little dings and dimples where the eyes are on the potato. You want to make sure to use a soft bristled brush and get around there and really scrub around to get all the bacteria, all the dirt out of those potatoes. And if you haven't washed your potatoes and you choose to make a mashed potato with the skin on, you can taste the dirt. You can taste that unwashed potato skin in your potatoes. So do take care to wash those really well. Whether you choose to peel your potatoes or not is up to you. A nice rustic mashed potato will have the skin on, and you can see that on the menus of very nice restaurants and pubs and all kinds of places to go to eat. But you can also peel that as well if the look of the skin in your mashed potato is a little off-putting. So if you do choose to leave the skins on, you will be getting a little boost in the nutritional content of the mashed potatoes. A lot of the nutrients of our fruits and vegetables linger right there close to the surface of the fruit or the vegetable. And potatoes are no exception to that rule. They certainly have a little bit more nutrition there closer to the skin, and that peel is going to give a little bit more fiber. Other nutrients in our mashed potatoes, across the board, potatoes are quite a powerhouse. You're going to get about a quarter of your day's potassium needs out of a simple potato. You're also going to get about 18% of your daily need for fiber out of a potato. 70% of your day's need of vitamin C. Move over oranges, move over. Potatoes are going to make way, very high sources of vitamin C. And you're going to get about 30% of your daily need of vitamin B6. Being from the plant world, potatoes are naturally cholesterol free, and in their naked form, they are very, very low in fat. They have almost no fat in them. It's what we put on them that tends to bring the calorie count and the fat count kind of a little bit higher than we should. But it's the holidays. Moderation is key. These are not things that you eat every day, all dolled up potatoes like this. So just remember moderation and portion control, and you should be fine. So I did mention that potatoes are going to absorb salt and water. So when we're preparing them, it's important to not soak our potatoes a long time. So after we've washed them, we're going to either peel them or not, and we're going to cut them into uniform pieces, chop them up. We don't want large pieces mixed in with small pieces. We want a fairly uniform cut as we put those into our container to cook them. And we're going to cover with a little bit of water. And I'm not sure if you can see what I've got here, but I do have some red potatoes that I opted to leave the peels on, and they're cubed up and they're in water and they're ready to be turned on and cooked. It's not recommended to soak your potatoes for a long period of time in water. And I have known a lot of people that say, you know what? Thanksgiving morning is just too busy for cooking. I prepare my potatoes the night before, put them in water in a pot in the refrigerator, and then the next morning I'm ready to go. And that actually does not lend to a good mashed potato. The potatoes are going to absorb a lot of extra liquid, and that's going to help break them down and make them very water saturated and kind of mushy. They're not going to hold up and be a nice whipped mashed potato for you, a nice fluffy mashed potato. So it's really not recommended to soak those overnight. If you choose to add some salt to the cooking water, that's fine. Again, the potato is going to absorb that salt. It's not necessary. A lot of people will salt and pepper at the table, or when you are finally mashing those potatoes and you're adding your other add-ins like your butter or your milk, then you can add salt and pepper at that time. So it really isn't necessary to add additional salt to the cooking water, but that's a choice that you could make. After we have cut them and we're going to boil them, we want to bring them to a boil and cut back and let them just gently simmer. And then you want to take a taste of them about 10-15 minutes in and monitor. You don't want a real soft piece of potato. You want it to be a little al dente, have a little bit of bite left to it. And then the key here, according to the Maine Potato Board, is you want to drain those potatoes incredibly well. So again, any water left over from the cooking that stays in the pot, or the longer your hot cooked potatoes stay in that cooking water, they're going to keep absorbing more liquid, even though the cooking time is over. As long as they're still submerged in that liquid, they're going to absorb it. So you want to drain those really, really, really well, shake out all the excess water, and then you're going to put them either back in your pan for the next step, or you're going to put them into a bowl so that you can work them or whatnot. The worst thing you can do to your mashed potatoes is use a blender or a mixer or any kind of immersion blender or food processor. Anything that's going to really, really knock the tar out of those potatoes is not recommended, because it breaks down the structure of the potatoes, and they actually become quite gluey and quite put offish when you eat them. So the best tools of the trade, I do not own a potato ricer, but many people swear by using a potato ricer to get the best, creamiest texture out of your mashed potatoes. These are my weapons of destruction, a potato masher of this kind that requires some good force to use, or a potato masher of this kind, the ziggy-zaggy kind. Either one of these tools is going to do a great job for you. You're going to add in butter or margarine, whichever you prefer, and that's going to help absorb, that's going to be absorbed in the potato and make that much more luscious and whippy. And that's exactly what you want. So again, there are some times where there are recipes that you want to cut down on the amount of butter or margarine that you put into your dish. This isn't one of them. So don't even pretend. Would Martha Stewart say, it's all good, these are good things. So add a little bit of your butter. It's recommended to use a salted butter, and again, because of the extra flavor. So, but just be careful. If you're adding salted water and you're adding salted butter and you're salting and peppering while you're preparing and you're salting at the table, then that's a lot of extra sodium that's being added to your dish, and a lot of it might be unnecessary. So perhaps an unsalted choice is better for you. Margarine, check your labels to see what else is in there for sodium, and season accordingly. So you're going to beat. You're going to add in your butter, and for the milk or the cream, it's really recommended, and I've warmed mine up and you can hopefully see some steam coming out of here, that you warm your milk first, because that helps keep the potato hot while you're adding your add-ins, and it helps absorb better into the potato. So some nice warmed up milk added to your mashed potato and your butter. And then you can add all kinds of other fun things if you want. You can add cream cheese while those potatoes are nice and hot. Put in some cream cheese and that'll help melt and go into those potatoes and be very creamy. You can add some sour cream. You can add garlic. You can add onions. You can add all kinds of dried herbs that you made over the summer. If you watched our webinar on drying herbs, you should have a whole pantry full of yummy herbs, nice and savory. I used my dried parsley when I made my potatoes, and that's one of the things I do love, and also chives. I'll add a lot of dried chives to my potatoes whenever I can. So what do these look like when we're done? Well, This is what the purple mashed potatoes look like. They almost look like a black raspberry type of ice cream. And again, this could be very fun. The flavor is very sweet, very earthy, but it does have a bit of a sweet note to it. That is a very, very tasty potato. And these are the Yukon Golds that I did up with my sprinkling on top of my dried parsley. And what you're going to look for when you're shopping for potatoes, you can buy potatoes in so many places. So most grocery stores will have them. Oftentimes you'll find them at the Dollar Tree or dollar store type places that have a food line. You can buy them at farmers markets. There's so many farmers markets. And up and down Route 1, where I live in Russet County, there are self-serve kiosks all up and down Route 1 where you can stop in every town and on the side of the road, just put your money in a box and take your bag of potatoes away. Grocery stores will tend to offer what I've seen for prices. A 5-pound bag might run you about $3.50. And the farm stands up and down Route 1, the general going price this year is about $4 for a 5-pound bag. So if you're looking at breaking that down price per pound, if the grocery store is $3.47 for a 5-pound bag, you're looking at 70 cents a pound. And if you're picking up your bag from the farm stand, your 5-pound bag is $4, that's 80 cents a pound. The Maine Potato Board says that 1 pound of potatoes should comfortably serve 2 people. So if that's the case, we're looking at probably 35 cents a serving for store-bought potatoes or 40 cents a serving per person for fresh farm-grown potatoes from Russet County, Maine. Quite the bargain, if you ask me. So after you've served your potatoes and you're cleaning up your Thanksgiving feast, you want to make sure that you store any leftovers in the refrigerator, and you want to use those up within 3 days. My experience is that cooked mashed potatoes do not particularly freeze well. They come out a very different product than what I put into the freezer, and I have not found them pleasant. So, you may experiment and find that your frozen mashed potatoes work better for you. I didn't find that mine did. Another neat thing that you can do is that if you just don't have the real estate available on top of your stove, because there's so many other things that are cooking on there, you can always make mashed potatoes in your slow cooker. And I do have my slow cooker here. Maine Potato Board provides a great recipe, and that will be included in the resources that you'll receive after this webinar, and they will be included at the end. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And I would love to pass this over now to Kate, who's going to talk about stuffing. Thank you.
So indeed, let's talk stuffing. We're making our way to the turkey that's coming up next. So stuffing, I think, is one of the crucial dishes at Thanksgiving. It's a must-have. And there's, of course, like regional differences and different preferences amongst families. So if you have your own tradition, of course, follow that recipe. I'm going to show you how to make a just kind of traditional, plain, we'll call it, although it's going to be great, cornbread stuffing. So I made my cornbread, and I just used the King Arthur flour recipe, but I used a local cornmeal. So there's a lot of cornbread recipes on the internet. Some can be too sweet, some can be too dry or just plain tasting. I trusted King Arthur flour to make me a nice one. And then I used this really great local cornmeal. So this is from Maine Grains, our local grain mill, and it's corn that is grown by Somali Bantu farmers. And I took a webinar from them recently and learned all about it, and it's just really a fascinating product. And it produced a really nice cornmeal. So I baked up the cornmeal yesterday, then I cut it into cubes and then dried it out. So if you skip this step, which I have done in the past, when you mix it with the wet ingredients, it'll just turn to like a mush. It's still delicious. It's maybe just a little less like texturally appealing than if you take the time to dry them out. So if you use a sourdough bread, same story, just cut it into cubes, bake it in your oven, a low, slow oven, like 250 degrees for an hour. Mine took a little longer to get it really nice and dry. It was very fragile, so I really wanted to bake it so that it holds up its structure. Then I sauteed up some mostly local ingredients. We did use celery, which is not in season this time of year. If you planned ahead, you could have chopped and frozen some celery, which I love to do. But it's local onions, local kale, celery, all diced up and sauteed in a whole stick of butter. So really this recipe, once you've got all the ingredients out, is just a dump and stir, which I love, nice and simple. So my sauteed ingredients go in along with 2 eggs, which I easily found local at the store. And then a bunch of herbs. So these are not local in November, but again, like Lisa said, could be if you planned ahead. So we've got 1/4 cup each of parsley, sage, and thyme. I know you're all thinking what I'm thinking. It's just add the rosemary and you've got a song. So you stir it all together. And then this recipe I'm following is for using a whole loaf of bread. And so it calls for 4 cups of stock to moisten it before you bake it. I don't think that my 9x9 pan of cornbread is equal to 1 whole loaf of bread. I'm gonna add like half the chicken stock. I purchased this chicken stock from a local market. They made it and have it as a value-added product in their freezer. You could, of course, make your own. If you followed along this summer and you canned some stock, this is actually beef stock, but if you had canned some chicken or vegetable stock, that would be great in here as well. So this is where you kind of just toss it and look at it and see, does it look like it's going to be moist enough, or do we need to add a little more, which I'm leaning towards, and I'm tossing very gently so that it doesn't disintegrate, since I took such great pains to avoid that. So that looks perfect. Not too soupy, but not going to be all dry and unpleasant, but we're just covering it in gravy anyway. So then what I'm going to do now, which is a little tip for you, since it's the 10 days before Thanksgiving, is I'm going to fill these pans and then I'm going to freeze them. So this is my bake ahead for next week. I was thinking, oh, I'll just have stuffing after the webinar for dinner and then make it again next week. But the more I thought about it, I was like, that's silly. I'll just make it for Thanksgiving next week. So this year it's just my husband and I. Normally we do a family Thanksgiving or a Friendsgiving, but we're being good and staying home. And so we're cooking, you know, all the dishes ourselves. So there we go. Check the stuffing off, because I'm just gonna cover it in my, I'm gonna cover the top with some friendly freezer paper here, put it in a freezer grade plastic bag, freeze it, and then to defrost it, pull it out and put it in the fridge a few days before I bake it off. All right, so I want to leave enough time to really hear everything that Chef Rob has to say about turkey. So I'm going to stop there and send it over to him.
All right, thanks so much for the handoff there, Kate. That stuffing looks fantastic. And I think you guys in the Southern Maine office are like the spokespeople for kale, you and Kathy down there. So anyway, so let's talk turkey. So Thanksgiving this year is going to be a little bit different than many Thanksgivings before. And I think a lot of people are going to be having a smaller crowd for Thanksgiving. So a turkey's a big old bird. I would still encourage you to support your local farmers, see what they raised for turkeys this year, see if you can get a nice local bird. And I'm going to show you today how to take that turkey down into boneless breasts and leg quarters. It's going to give you the option that if it's just dinner for 2, you could roast 1 breast, freeze the other one. You could take your leg quarters, you could cook them low and slow separately, make yourself some lovely turkey and dumplings or turkey pot pie. A lot of options by breaking the turkey down. The other wonderful thing about breaking it down is you get the backbone, you get the rib cage for making a really lovely stock. So I've got a 12-pound bird here. I've got a nice cutting board, and I've got a boning knife. I'm going to start by loosening up the turkey's legs. And the reason we want to loosen up a little bit is we don't want to cut the skin off of our breasts. We still want to have nice skin coverage when we roast our individual breasts later on. So our first cut is going to be to separate the skin away from the thigh and the breast. And that's just the only thing I'm cutting here is skin. And I'm just trying to loosen things up. And so I'll turn this one towards you a little bit. So stretch and then cut with your knife close to your drum and cut all the way into the front here. And the idea is you just want to loosen up as much of that skin as possible so that you don't tear it later on. So now that I have both sides loosened up, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to dislocate my thigh bone. So you see the thigh bone popped out right there. And I'm going to repeat that process on this side by just simply giving it a little bit of a bend using my other hand to kind of press against it. Now that my thigh bone is nice and loose, I'm going to follow along the backbone here. And when I get into that thigh joint, I'm going to just tug a little bit, and that's going to allow me to remove the oyster in its entirety. So now I've got a lovely leg quarter. I'm going to set that right aside. I'm going to repeat that process on the other side of this turkey. Now, a smaller bird certainly makes this quite a bit easier. But if you've got a big bird, the process is the same. And in all honesty, the carcass of a turkey and the carcass of a chicken are put together almost identically. So you can very easily practice on a chicken and break it down into mini cuts that you can enjoy later on. Now, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take off the extra part of the wings. Now, I did say boneless. It's going to be semi-boneless for the breast. We're going to leave the first wing joint attached, and that's going to allow you to have a kind of a classic cut called a Statler or an airline, and that's kind of an elegant look for a presentation. Now, once you clear that skin, you want to get right down into that joint. You just give it a little bit of a crack. You can pass your knife through with very little resistance. So there's our wings. Now, it could be kind of fun if you're breaking down a bunch of turkeys. You'd have like the most colossal buffalo wings you could ever dream of. In fact, I think there's a bar in Portland called the Great Lost Bear that serves turkey wings instead of chicken wings, but kind of a fun gimmick there for sure. All right. Now, what I'm going to use these for is making some really fantastic gravy. Now, one thing I will mention, if you wanted to roast just the white meat and you wanted to still roast it on the bone, people would often call this a crown roast here. And this is a lovely presentation. You can cook these separately. I've done this for Thanksgiving a few times, and it is a really nice way to serve your Thanksgiving bird. But I'm going to show you again today how to take it a step further. So we want to cut down the middle of the breast here, and we want to follow along what's called the keel bone. So there's a bone right here that divides the two breasts. We're going to run right down that with our knife for a very kind of gentle cut to start. And the idea here is that you want to make sure you separate the skin all the way, so that as we take these breasts off, we've got two nice pieces that have full skin coverage. So now that we've removed, or we've cut through the skin, we're going to start the process of removing the breasts from the backbone. So to do this, you want a nice sharp boning knife, and you want to make some shallow cuts following the curvature of the backbone, right? And you want to just kind of peel that away as you go, working down and kind of letting gravity do a little bit of work for you in that it's pulling that turkey away, okay? Follow along closely. Remember, you don't want to leave too much meat on your carcass. You know, a little meat is okay. You can save it later, but or you can pick it off later after you make stock, but it's better to leave more meat on the breast. Now, once you've gotten down to where you can see the tender here, or the tendon and the tender, you know that you're close to the joint where that first wing bone comes through. So I like to use my knife, get right into that joint, and just cut off what is now a really nice boneless breast that can be roasted and served. You know, this off of a 12-pound bird, I think you could comfortably serve 4 people here. So very economical option, especially, you know, if you were to buy a commodity turkey or something from the grocery store, you know, prices can be as little as, you know, $1.30 a pound or something like that. But if you were to buy even a local bird, you know, at $5 a pound, you break this down into all of these different meals. You know, you're serving a lot of people with that 50-pound bird, and you've got the added benefit of knowing that you're supporting, you know, local agriculture in your community, you know, rather than Midwestern agriculture, where a lot of that commodity farming is taking place. So great opportunity, buy local. Now, I'm going to repeat that process on the opposite side here, and then I'm going to do a really quick demo on how to make some gravy. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat, go right down. Now, since we're going to make gravy, it's important to talk about this piece of treasure that we have right here, okay? So now that we've taken all of our kind of principal cuts off of our turkey, we're left with this, which might be one of the most valuable pieces of the whole turkey. This is going to make for you the very best stock that you could hope for, right? And that stock or broth is going to make the most lovely gravy that you can ever make, or you can put that broth right into your stuffing, you can put it into your turkey pot pie or your turkey tetrazzini, other parts that go really well in the stock. This is the neck that always comes inside, your wing tips. And one other thing that I like to mention, if you are going to buy a local bird and you want to get the maximum value out of it, trim away the excess skin and fat of your bird, render that down in a pot until you've got the rendered turkey fat. And that is a wonderful cooking fat that you can use for potatoes. You can use that for making your gravy if you really want to have a wonderful, super turkey-rich gravy. All right, let me wipe down my top here, and I'll switch to my stove top. And we'll dive right into the next part of this demo. Now, turkey, like chicken, is something that you need to sanitize, post-cutting. You also want to wash your hands so that you are not causing cross-contamination. So very good to have a nice clean workspace. And I would encourage everyone to use a sanitizer in their home. It's very easy to mix up a little bit of bleach or to buy a ready-to-use bleach sanitizing product. So I'm using an industrial sanitizer here called DDBSA, but anyways. Okay. Next up, let's make a little bit of gravy. So I've got my lovely turkey stock here. Just kidding, it's actually chicken stock. I haven't cut up the turkey yet. And I've got flour and butter. So if you cut your turkey up in advance and you've made stock with your carcass, then you've got this lovely ready-to-use stuff to make gravy. Now, I understand a lot of people roast a whole turkey. They take the drippings and they try to make gravy from that. Oftentimes, it's kind of a hurried affair on an already busy day of cooking. I would encourage you make your stock in advance. Don't stress out when it's time to serve the meal making a gravy. The other problem sometimes with using your drippings is overwhelming your gravy with fat. You don't actually need a huge amount of fat to make a gravy. The rule of thumb for making gravies is 1 pound to 1 gallon. So that's 1 pound of roux, 8 ounces of fat, and 8 ounces of flour to 1 gallon of liquid. So I'm doing a scaled down batch here. I'm gonna go right in my pot with this butter. I'm gonna melt the butter. I'm gonna add in this flour, and that is going to create a roux. Now, I did mention earlier, and it's worth mentioning again, don't be afraid to use your turkey fat, or if you are really a good food saver, you might have some rendered chicken fat like schmaltz. That's also a lovely fat to use for this. Fats I do not recommend. I would not recommend using olive oil. Olive oil is going to lend a very grassy or bitter taste to your gravy. You can use vegetable oil, and that was about what I would recommend. I wouldn't get into the world of coconut oils or things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and go in with my flour, and we're gonna stir this until it just starts to come together into a peanut butter-like consistency, okay? And I'll zoom in a little bit with the camera so you guys can see that we've got this nice, creamy, peanut butter-like consistency in the pot. And you wanna stir frequently with the roux. You don't wanna burn your flour, okay? If you didn't use a roux, you can also make a gravy and thicken it with cornstarch, and that's called a slurry. That cornstarch slurry is something that you should make with cold water, and make sure that you are thoroughly stirring when you add it into your simmering chicken stock, and that is going to keep it from thickening very lumpy and onto the bottom of your pan. Now, I always, when making gravy, add my liquid in incrementally. And so I've got about half of my stock in to start. It immediately turned into a thick paste. And now I'm gonna add in the rest of my stock here in 2 additions. And that's going to yield for me a very nice, lovely, creamy gravy. I'm going to switch at this point to my whisk, and I'm going to whisk that in, bring it to a boil, and then simmer this slowly until I've reached what's called a nappe consistency. A nappe is where it holds and coats the back of a spoon, and you can run your finger down the middle and it will leave a line through that gravy. So that's the basics of how to make a lovely turkey gravy. And I don't want to steal all the time, so with that, I'll pass this off to Kathy back in our Southern Portland office. So Kathy, take it away.
All right, thanks. We are just about at the end of our time, but of course we didn't want to overlook dessert. So sky's the limit. You've got lots of local Maine foods to choose from when it comes time to make dessert. Cranberries, apples, pumpkins, squash, even seeing local ginger available now. So you have lots of things that you can do. I want to ask Kate if she has any questions in the Q&A box. And while she's pulling those up, we're going to show you, we've got an example here of a great Thanksgiving holiday dessert. It's local apples, both Cortland and McIntosh, with some previously frozen blueberries, previously frozen cranberries, and simply going to dump a crumb topping over those using some great local Maine oats. So lots of local things in here. And this is a prelude to our next upcoming webinar, which will be Gifts from the Kitchen, and will feature this crumb topping as one of the recipes. This simply gets baked at 350 degrees for 40 minutes. But please tune in to our next webinar, December 8th, to learn more about Gifts from the Kitchen. So pass it back to Kate to see if we got anything in the Q&A box.
Thanks, Kathy. We actually were able to answer everyone's questions as they came in. Someone had a question about how to grow Brussels sprouts, and then the great suggestion to add some balsamic vinegar to the roasted Brussels sprouts, which is always a popular preparation. So that is it for us today. Thank you all for joining us. I'm gonna send you an email that contains all of these recommended resources, as well as the recipes that we made here today. And then we'll also include our great directory of the Maine farm products so that you can make sure that you have a good representation of local food at your holiday table. And like Kathy said, we'll be back December 8th at 2 p.m. to talk about how to make holiday gifts from the kitchen. And then after that, we'll have a new webinar cooking and preserving series for 2021. So stay tuned. So I hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you so much for joining us today.